Stonehenge wasn't a witchy monument to travel through time. It was actually constructed as a hope to build a different future. Recent research just found out that the monument was probably raised as an attempt to reunite the Britons during a period of big division. The thread of this story lies on the altar stone, the monument's most iconic rock. For years, scientists believed that the stones used in Stonehenge, including the altar stone, came from the nearby Preseli Hills in Wales. In this scenario, Stonehenge would have been built by a local community, that is, Neolithic people who would have found easy-to-access materials to build a ceremonial mound, a sundial calendar, and a final resting place, all in one. Things changed when another discovery was made. In 2018, leading-edge research pointed that the altar stone actually came from the River Tay region in northeastern Scotland, which is located over 400 miles away from Stonehenge. Scientists found similar rocks as such in Scottish monuments. You see, the altar stone is a recumbent stone, laying on its side. Many of the rocks were found in ceremonial stone circles in Scotland, and they are unique to this region. When this discovery broke through, it got archaeologists thinking. Maybe Stonehenge wasn't just a local project, but a wider collaboration between different tribes and communities across Britain. To understand this, we need to rewind to around 3000 BCE. That's when Britain still wasn't a unified country per se. Rather, it was a patchwork of tribes such as those coming from southern or eastern Europe, each with their own customs and beliefs. As an island, Britain's population changed many times. Britain was mainly composed of farmers who descended from people from the Middle East and arrived on the land around 6,000 years ago. This group thrived in the area until 2500 BCE, when another group coming from the regions of the Netherlands and Germany started to appear. These ones, also known as the Beaker people, were responsible for the large population turnover that Britain experienced during the Neolithic period and the years that followed. The Beakers were called so because of a specific type of pottery they used to make and bury their loved ones with after their passing. It's possible that the original dwellers of the land didn't like it that their land was being repopulated. And what researchers suggest is that Stonehenge was this attempt to reunite the original Neolithic farmer population and regain some type of identity control over their land. They would have invested a lot of time and energy in bringing the altar stone all the way down from Scotland, without the help of wheel technology, for example. You see, the wheel had already been invented in Lower Mesopotamia, but since there was no Wi-Fi at the time, the Brits weren't aware of this technology until much later on. This whole territorial crisis could have driven locals to use their resources to move the altar stone to Salisbury Plain in England in order to reunify the land. You see, Stonehenge wasn't built in one go. Its history dates to around 3000 BCE. That's when the monument was just a circular ditch and bank known as a henge. Inside, they placed wooden posts and possibly totem-like carvings. This version of Stonehenge wasn't about rocks yet. It was more of a ritualistic place and possibly a final resting place. They found several cremation pits from this period, making it the oldest resting place in all of Britain. It was only around 2600 BCE that the blue stones came around. The naming might be a bit misleading since they're not literally blue rocks. They have a bluish tinge to them when they're freshly broken, hence the name. These smaller rocks probably came from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, which is about 150 miles away from Stonehenge. Some researchers say that the ancient ones believed that blue stones had healing qualities. So we can maybe guess why they went through all of the trouble to move them from Wales to Salisbury Plains, huh? A little bit later than that, circa 2500, that's when we start having the Stonehenge we know and love today. That's when the Sarsen stones started to arrive. The Sarsens are Stonehenge's huge stones. I mean, each sarsen can weigh around 25 tons. That's as much as 3 African elephants stacked together. The Sarsens make that iconic outer ring circle. Supposedly, that's also when the altar stone was moved from Scotland directly to the heart of Stonehenge. The altar stone is the largest of the blue stones used to build Stonehenge. Today, the altar stone lies recumbent at the foot of the largest trilithon of the monument. In case you don't know, the trilithons are the horizontal stones used to form those famous arches we see today. And here's where the story takes a twist. For nearly a century, scientists believe that the altar stone came from the same area as the blue stones, the Preseli Hills in Wales. It made sense back then. If you're already hauling stones from Wales, why not grab a special one to be the so-called altar? Except that theory started crumbling in 2018, when a team of researchers decided to dig deeper. They used advanced geochemical analysis to pinpoint where the altar stone's sandstone actually came from, and it turns out it wasn't Wales. Instead, the results pointed north, specifically to the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland, 400 miles from Stonehenge. This revelation changed the whole script of Stonehenge's story. How would they move the rocks, you may ask? Well, there's an old theory known as the ice road that suggests that the rocks were moved by natural icy pathways that formed during the winter. This way, they could slide the rocks down all the way to Stonehenge. But hey, if we're talking about a distance of over 100 miles, that's not too realistic. Anyways, this theory was debunked because it was warmer back then than it is today. There's also the river theory that suggests that the rocks were floating along the river from the quarry to the site. But if we're talking about Sarsen rocks, they're too heavy to float. So there goes this theory. What we're saying is, no one knows how the rocks were moved. Another interesting info came from all the research done in Stonehenge. A recent laser survey of the stones revealed the different stone working methods used and has shown that some parts of the monument were more carefully finished than others. In particular, the northeast side and the inner faces of the central trilithons were finely dressed. FYI, a trilithon is one of Stonehenge's most famous shapes. It's when 2 huge monoliths receive a third one on top of them, connecting the 2 together. This fancy word is just Greek for having 3 stones. But anyway, the bigger question, and maybe why Stonehenge is so famous, is why it was built in the first place. You see, Stonehenge's entire layout seems to have been carefully planned to align with the movements of the sun. The monument's architecture is particularly attuned to the solstices, the shortest and longest days of the year. During the summer solstice, the sun rises perfectly in line with the heel stone, casting light straight into the heart of the stone circle. A spectacular, almost magical sight that surely wowed its ancient audience. But it's the midwinter solstice that seems to hold a special connection to the altar stone. As the sun sets on that day, its light aligns with the altar stone at the center of Stonehenge. To the builders of Stonehenge, this alignment may have symbolized more than just celestial precision. It likely carried profound ancestral and spiritual significance. The altar stone, illuminated by the setting sun, could have been seen as a bridge between worlds, connecting the living with their ancestors, the earth with the cosmos, and the present with the eternal. In a world without calendars, clocks, or weather apps, the solstices were everything. They marked the rhythm of life, guiding agricultural cycles and spiritual rituals alike. So Stonehenge wasn't just about the stones or the people who built it, but perhaps a way to honor their ancestral roots in an ever-changing world.
Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life from age 0 to age 80 working on the Stonehenge project. It would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed. Did they? Well, actually, they existed. And some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk, yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find, along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago, just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, the smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities. Recently, scientists made an astonishing discovery that might solve Stonehenge's mystery. They found something hidden deep within the DNA of Stonehenge's sarsen rocks, the huge monolithic ones, and it might reveal why our Neolithic ancestors designed and built this thing in the first place. Over the years, scientists have been scratching their heads trying to figure out where the huge sarsen rocks came from. For years, they believed they came from a quarry just 15 miles away from the site, known as Marlborough Downs. At this site, they found similar minerals to the ones that make up the sarsen rocks, but it turned out there was more to this story than they thought. The understanding of how Stonehenge was built is always changing. Scientists need to really travel back in time to uncover its mysteries. Where did the rocks come from? How were they carried? Why was the site built? You see, the Stonehenge site, located at Salisbury Plain in England, is made up of two main types of stone. There are the super heavy sarsens and the lighter and smaller bluestones. The sarsens each weigh about 25 tons. That's as much as 3 African elephants stacked together. The heaviest sarsen stone, called the heel stone, weighs 30 tons all by itself. Together, the Saracens make that iconic outer ring circle. Inside that circle, that's where you'll find the blue stones. The naming might seem a bit misleading since they're not really blue. They have a bluish tinge to them when they are freshly broken, hence the name. These smaller rocks probably came from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, which is about 150 miles away from Stonehenge. They're a bit lighter than the Saracens, but still pretty heavy. The altar stone, which is classified as a blue stone, is the heaviest one, weighing around 6 tons. Its original location still isn't known for sure. To figure out where a rock came from, scientists first have to study their composition. This is like checking the rock's DNA. Then they cross-reference the structure of the rock with minerals in the soil to see if it's a match. Most of the Saracens we see around southern England are actually made of a type of sandstone known as silcrete. Think of silcrete as sand that's been hardened by underground water processes over millions of years. This process mostly happened during a period called the Paleogene, about 65 to 23 million years ago. These Saracen rocks didn't form in one big slab, but in patches, like nature leaving little rock gardens all over the place. Scientists reason the Saracens spread out randomly, forming in isolated pockets. Over time, many were buried under layers of clay and chalk, which helped preserve them. When ancient builders were on the lookout for materials, these Saracens must have looked perfect for something impressive like Stonehenge. Actually, Saracens have been used in everything, from Roman villas to medieval churches, and even in things like road curbs and old field walls. One could say these rocks were the it material for ancient builders, and continue to be popular even into more modern times. This fact made scientists start wondering that maybe not all Saracen stones that were used to build Stonehenge came from the same place. They've identified Saracen sites all over the UK, in places such as Oxfordshire and Kent. After hundreds of years of studying the Saracens, geologists finally had the right type of technology to determine the origin of the stones. Now, I wish I could tell you that it was some undisclosed location very far away from the site. But, as it turned out, the Saracens were originally from Westwoods, the forest near Stonehenge. A new factor came into play when excavations uncovered empty stone holes, showing that at least 6 blue stone pillars were removed from a Preseli Hills site called Wan Main in prehistory. They had a stone circle over there, and it's believed that some of Stonehenge's rocks were recycled rocks from this more ancient circle. If this is true, it might be that Stonehenge is part of a much larger landscape of ancient sites. If this is the case, then Stonehenge is just the cherry on top of a much larger scale project. Think of it as the sacred centerpiece of an entire landscape of monuments, mounds, stone circles, and things. This is why scientists want to find out where the rocks came from so badly. It could lead to why and how Stonehenge was built. Now, Stonehenge didn't just pop up overnight. It was built in several stages over hundreds of years. It's likely that it wasn't a single unified vision, but more like a big community project that evolved over time. With each generation, the builders brought in their own ideas, creating a stone structure that would last for ages. The first stage was around 3100 BCE. That's when people dug out a circular ditch and likely set up some bluestones as sort of a starter ring. Later, they added the Saracens and even topped some of them with horizontal stones to form those famous arches you see today, also known as the trilithons. These ancient builders had some challenges on their hands. How would they move the rocks? There's an old theory known as the ice road that suggests that the rocks were moved by natural icy pathways that formed during the winter. This way, they could slide the rocks down all the way to Stonehenge. But hey, if we're talking about a distance of over 100 miles, that's not too realistic. Anyways, this theory was debunked because it was warmer back then than it is today. There's also the river theory, which suggests that the rocks were floated along the river from the quarry to the site. But if we're talking about sarsen rocks, they're too heavy to float. So there goes that theory. What we're saying is, no one knows how the rocks were moved. Another interesting science tidbit came from all the research done in Stonehenge. A recent laser survey of the stones revealed the different stone working methods used, and has shown that some of the parts of the monument were more carefully finished than others. In particular, the northeast side and the inner faces of the central trilithons were finely dressed. FYI, a trilithon is one of Stonehenge's most famous shapes. It's when two huge monoliths receive a third one on top of them, connecting the two together. This fancy word is simply Greek for having three stones. But anyways, the bigger question, and the reason Stonehenge is so famous, is why it was built in the first place. Theories are all over the place, and some sound like they're straight out of a sci-fi show. So here's a rundown of the most popular ideas. There's, of course, the solar calendar theory. This one supposes that the stones are aligned with the movements of the sun, especially during the summer and winter solstices. During the summer solstice, the sun rises to the left of the heel stone, that's the lone stone outside the main circle, lighting up the entire monument. Some say it's the ancient version of a calendar, marking the year's longest and shortest days. Some archaeologists think Stonehenge might have been an ancient healing center. Pieces of bluestone have been found chipped away, possibly by people who believed they had healing powers. The theory goes that people traveled from all over to come to Stonehenge in hopes of a cure for whatever was ailing them. There's also some speculation that Stonehenge was the place to be. Think of it as an ancient gathering spot. Some evidence suggests that communities from distant areas traveled to Stonehenge for gatherings, feasts, and ceremonies. Studies of bones found near the site show they came from all over Britain, making it a sort of prehistoric meetup location.
The majority of us have believed for a really long time that Stonehenge, one of the most iconic monuments in the world, was an ancient calendar because of its alignment with the summer and winter solstices. But no one could figure out how it really worked. Now, a team of researchers have come out with another study. It turns out that Stonehenge could have functioned like the solar calendar. It's a similar principle to the solar calendar ancient Egyptians used to have, the one based on a year composed of 365.25 days. Each of the stones from this big mysterious sarsen circle represented one day within a month. Sarsens are what we call these large boulders. It's actually a perpetual calendar, where people could track every winter solstice sunset. That way, those who lived near Stonehenge, which is today Wiltshire, UK, could keep track of the days and months of the year. We all now understand this mysterious calendar system because of this interesting discovery in 2020. The team has identified the source of 50 of the 52 sarsens that make up the iconic stone circle we all know about. They analyzed the chemical composition of these sarsens and traced their origins to the West Woods in Wiltshire, which is about 15 miles away from the monument. Not only did these 50 sarsens come from the same source, but they were also placed in their current position at approximately the same time. They make the outer circle of Stonehenge, together with a horseshoe-shaped inner ring. Near the center of the monument, there are smaller rocks, known as bluestones. The team traced the origins of the bluestones all the way to Wales. They also discovered that the sarsens share a common chemistry, over 99% silica with trace elements. Two sarsens were different from each other and also different from the main cluster. These sarsens were arranged in 3 different formations at Stonehenge. 30 of them formed this huge stone circle that dominates the monument. 4 station stones ended up in a rectangular formation outside the circle, while the rest, located inside the stone circle, were constructed into 5 trilithons. A trilithon is when you have 2 vertical stones with a horizontal lintel at the top. 30, 5, and 4 are pretty interesting numbers in the context of this calendar system.
The 30 uprights that are spread around the main sarsen ring could represent days of the month. If you multiply that by 12, you get 360. Add on 5 more, those from the central trilithons, and the result is 365. And to really adjust the calendar to match a solar year, you need to add 1 extra leap day for every 4 years, right? The team believes the ancient people used the 4 station stones to keep track of this part. So, in this system, they paired the summer and winter solstice every year with the same pair of stones. Ancient people started building Stonehenge about 5,000 years ago, and it took more than 1,000 years to finish the work. But the Stonehenge you see today is not the complete, original version from the beginning. People have broken and taken away many of its old bluestones and sarsens. The entire structure also changed over time since there were generations and generations, 180 of them to be precise, that passed since the beginning of Stonehenge, who would participate in the building and rebuilding of it. People created Stonehenge in 4 stages. They first built a circular enclosure that stretched over 330 feet, 100 meters, in diameter and went around 56 pits. A high bank flanks the ditch of the enclosure, while there's a low bank on the outside. Some theories even say that this part was some form of a communal cemetery. Later, in the second stage, builders added a horseshoe of sarsen trilithons. In the third stage, they constructed a ceremonial avenue that was nearly 2 miles long. It possibly traced the path of the bluestones. People moved from the Aubrey holes to the Q&R holes, a double arc that these bluestones have been arranged into. At this stage, builders also reorganized the entrance stones and recut the main enclosure ditch. During the fourth stage, the stones were broken and builders etched carvings into the sarsens. Later, the bluestones ended up being modified again. Builders didn't leave any written records about how they managed to drag these heavy stones to the site and get them to stand so perfectly upright. But there are theories that say their techniques were more closely associated with woodwork than masonry. They made mortise holes and protruding tenons because they wanted to slot these stones together, and they used tongue and groove joints to do that. When they dug the hole for the stones, they placed timber poles at the back of the holes that were used as brace support. Then they moved the stone into a position and hauled it upward with ropes. They packed rubble into the hole to make sure the stone stayed in place. A pre-industrial farming society put this fascinating monument together using only tools made of stone and bone. Not even the wheel had been invented yet. This unusual formation is also known as ringing rocks. The stones you can see at Stonehenge have some pretty odd acoustic properties. When you strike them, they produce a loud clanging sound. That could be one of the reasons why people bothered to transport them over such a long distance in the first place. In some ancient cultures, people believed that these rocks contained healing powers. It's a really popular location that attracts over 1 million visitors a year. When it first opened to the public, visitors were allowed to walk among the stones. They could even climb on them, as there weren't any restrictions. Until the 19th century, visitors would regularly chip off pieces of the rock to take them home as souvenirs. They would also engrave their initials into the stones. They camped within the circle and dug fire pits, not realizing that the digging pits could seriously undermine the stability of the entire monument. Over time, visitors have encountered more and more restrictions until the monument was finally roped off in 1997 because of the serious erosion of the stones. That means if you want to visit, you can only view it from a distance unless you want to pay extra for the stone circle experience, which can be arranged outside of normal visiting hours. Stonehenge originally had 2 entrances that led into the enclosure. There was a wide one to the northeast and one that was a bit smaller and located on the southern side. If you look at it today, you can see there are many more gaps. This is mostly because of tracks made later that once crossed the monument. The ground within Stonehenge has been severely disturbed, and it wasn't just about random visitors digging fire pits. There was a group of people who dug a large deep hole within the stone circle in the 17th century because they were looking for treasure. Then there was Charles Darwin, who also did some digging because he was studying earthworms in the area. He wanted to know how these worms could impact objects in the soil over time. He observed how a fallen stone there had sunk deeper into the ground and realized it was happening because of the activities of these tiny creatures who churned through the soil all the time. In 1963, there was a theory that Stonehenge had been built as some sort of computer that predicts solar and lunar eclipses. Later, some proposed it was actually constructed as a monument to ancestors that had passed away. This theory says the permanence of its stones represented the eternal afterlife. The average sarsen you can find there weighs 25 tons, while the biggest one weighs around 30 tons. If you want to get an idea of how massive these stones really are, you can go behind the visitor center in the outdoor gallery to check out a replica sarsen stone. It's a true copy of a freestanding upright from one of the trilithons that are located in the inner horseshoe of the monument. There are 5 Neolithic houses at Stonehenge based on real archaeological evidence of houses found in that area. Each of them had stake-built walls and a chalk floor. Some even had furniture. There was also a lot of trash discovered, which means people in this area used to like celebrations and feasting. Research has shown that people lived in these houses for 50 to 100 years, around 4,500 years BCE, which was the time when the builders brought the sarsen stones to Stonehenge. During the time they were building Stonehenge, generations of people went through major changes themselves, from the Stone Age to the early Bronze Age. They were no longer as static and isolated. They started to travel and trade more, which means they communicated way more than their ancestors, even internationally. This is how they could have spread the word about Stonehenge. And it's also when the whole mystery and fascination with the monument began.
It's the hottest place on Earth. Well, at least when it comes to the temperature of the air. On the 10th of July, 1913, the temperature here reached a frightening and record-breaking 134.1 degrees Fahrenheit. No wonder people call it the Death Valley. It's also the lowest point in all of North America, located at 282 feet below sea level. When you come here for the first time, you may be tricked into thinking you're suddenly surrounded by ice. But is that really frozen water you see out there? Don't let yourself be fooled. It's actually salt. As rainwater combines with minerals, the outer layer of rocks surrounding the area gets dissolved. When the water evaporates, the only thing that's left is salt. If you're a fan of water, this isn't the best place for you, since rainfalls are rare in Death Valley. So rare that, on average, this area gets less than 2 inches of precipitation each year. This makes Death Valley the driest spot, not only in the USA, but in all of North America as well. In 1929 and 1953, this location did not get a single drop of rain for the whole year. This surreal landscape becomes even more striking once you see sand dunes. Sure, they only account for a small portion of Death Valley, but they're indeed some of the most memorable sights, with some of them rising over 680 feet. Should you ever get to the top of the sand dunes, you may be lucky enough to experience one of the strangest things in the desert, singing sand. But why does this happen? Is it actually the sand making that noise, or is something else to blame? The short answer is that we've yet to fully understand this phenomenon. One explanation could be that the sand that slides down the dunes produces this sound due to the friction between its grains. When you're listening to it, it resembles an airplane flying in the distance. This is one of the few places on Earth where the sand makes a noise so loud that you can actually hear it. Other places are the Namib Desert in Africa or the barking sands of Hawaii. If you think things can't possibly get any stranger in this surreal location, hear me out. Some of the rocks here seem to be moving on their own. Could it be because animals bump into them? I mean, the valley is home to the famous roadrunner. This little bird, which is less than 2 feet tall and has a weight of 1 pound, is one of the very few creatures living here. It's adapted its body temperature to survive the intense heat during the day. But the roadrunner may not be the culprit after all, since it's not nearly big enough to cause such consequences. Also, nothing seems to be pushing these rocks. The trail they leave behind is too prominent. Well, in that case, should we blame the winds? This explanation doesn't seem to fit either, since some of those rocks are so large that it's impossible for them to simply be blown away. I mean, they can weigh up to 700 pounds and still travel the distance of over 1,500 feet. In that case, maybe there's something in the composition of these rocks that helps them move whenever they want. Is there any special material that these rocks are made of? Scientists were just as disappointed as you are right now when they researched the theory. There's nothing unique about the composition of these rocks. They're just ordinary stones, mostly composed of dolomite and granite. They were previously a part of local cliffs and outcrops, and then just happened to fall off. Anyway, the rock movements have been intriguing researchers ever since their discovery back in the early 1900s. Even more curious is that depending on the shape of the rocks, their trajectories seem to differ. While rocks with a rough-bottomed surface create straight tracks, smooth-bottomed ones appear to wander. Researchers have tried to figure out the multiple rock movements and how they form those trails in many different ways. For example, by observing the location with the help of video cameras. They also created a dedicated meteorological station on the site and even placed GPS tracking devices on some of these rocks. There's another question. Why do some of these rocks move together? Regardless of their shape and size, some of them appear to leave parallel tracks. It looks like they're just following the same direction, taking the same turns and curves while they move. I mean, these rocks don't just happen to be going to the same party, am I right? Only in 2014 did scientists manage to actually capture the movements of the rocks on tape. Until then, nobody had seen these rocks moving. People were just intrigued by the mystery of the marks left behind. With the help of time-lapse photography, which basically means taking photos of the same frame for some time and then playing them back like a movie, scientists finally discovered what was behind the movement of these rocks. So, did it really have anything to do with animals or the wind? Or was it some other mysterious force that was pushing the rocks across the empty landscape? Well, the answer isn't as simple as you'd imagine. It all comes down to a combination of rainfall, rapid changes in temperature, and a little bit of wind. To put it simply, when it rains in the valley, the place can sometimes freeze over, and the entire valley starts looking like a giant ice skating rink. Some of the rocks get stuck in the ice too. Once the temperature rises and the ice starts to melt, parts of that ice sheet begin to move slowly, dragging the rocks along. Hence the movement of the rocks and the traces they leave behind. Since the earth underneath the rocks becomes muddier due to the rain, it gets easier for the stones to move along with the ice sheet. Once the ice melts away, the water evaporates, leaving no indication of what actually happened. The traces left by the rocks solidify in the heat of the sun, making it look like the rocks have been moving on their own. What made it difficult for scientists to crack this mystery was the fact that the ice sheet that helps these rocks move is very, very thin. It needs to be large enough in terms of its overall surface, but thin enough to evaporate really quickly, leaving no sign that it was actually there. Anyway, despite the desert's name, there are a lot of creatures wandering around this location. Even fish. I know, fish in the desert, right? Well, surprisingly, there are 6 species of fish that can survive there, despite the salty waters and difficult conditions. One of these resilient species of fish is the devil's hole pupfish. It only lives there, in the water whose temperature can rise up to a staggering 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of the temperature and oxygen concentration, no other species of fish can make it. But it's not just fish. There's actually quite a variety of wildlife in the desert. It's home to more than 50 species of mammals and even several types of reptiles. You'll find here such animals as coyotes, kit foxes, bobcats, and mountain lions. Among smaller species, you'll be able to spot rabbits, squirrels, bats, tortoises, rats, and mice. Some of the animals living here needed to adapt to the harsh conditions and came up with really creative solutions. Like the jackrabbit, for example. It uses its oversized ears to help it stay cool during the intense summer heat. Kangaroo rats also have a unique trick up their sleeve. They can survive with almost no water at all. How? they can get all the necessary water from the food they eat. Other creatures, like tortoises, use hibernation. For up to 9 months each year, they rest to protect themselves from the extreme conditions of the desert. Imagine you've booked a tour through the jungles of Costa Rica. All of a sudden, you stumble upon a huge stone sphere, nearly the length of a king-sized bed in diameter. How on earth did it end up there? And what does it symbolize? You immediately ask your guide. He's not as amazed as you are and tells you that there are actually several hundreds of them scattered across the south of the country. The mysterious stone spheres don't have an official name. The locals simply call them las bolas, which means balls in Spanish, while historians refer to them as Diquis spheres, after the culture that produced them. Scientists have studied the sediment layers of the Earth around them and estimate that the earliest were made around the year 600 CE, and the newest ones date to the year 1000 CE. Many of the spheres were relocated after their initial discovery, and that's why archaeologists can't date them precisely. The Diquis culture completely disappeared shortly after they were discovered by the Spanish in the 16th century. Unlike the Mayas and the Aztecs, the myths or legends of these peoples didn't survive, so they cannot explain the existence of the mysterious orbs. More than 300 of these objects have been discovered so far, with some being smaller than 1 inch in diameter, and the largest measures 6.6 feet in diameter, standing taller than most humans. Although there are ones made from limestone, most spheres were carved out of a coarse version of basalt, a type of rock that forms when lava cools rapidly. Some orbs weigh up to 15 tons, and in most cases, their surface is smooth to the touch, although there are coarse, mostly unfinished pieces. If we throw away the theory that river erosion naturally sculpted the spheres, the ancient people seem to have created them by hammering boulders with other rocks. Once they got the rough shape they were aiming for, they would polish the rock to perfection, using techniques such as controlled fracture and grinding. The mysterious spheres are located in the Diquis Delta, on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Most of them can be found in a place called Farm 6, which, alongside 3 other sites, was proclaimed a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2014. The area contains other finds from the pre-Columbian era, such as paved areas, burial sites, and mounds. For centuries, the stone balls were hidden under a thick layer of sediment that protected them against the elements and looters until they were unearthed during the 1930s. The company that owned the land was clearing the rainforest for banana plantations when they stumbled upon these unusual stone constructions. Some were damaged by bulldozers, and some by workers trying to pry them open, as they believed there was gold hidden inside. It took a while before the authorities intervened to stop further damage to the finds. Doris Stone, the daughter of an executive of the company that owned the land, was the first to study the spheres. In 1943, she published an article in a leading American archaeological journal, turning the world's attention to the orbs. Expeditions soon followed, and archaeologists were immediately able to determine that the stone formations were human-made, probably created by the ancient indigenous population of Costa Rica. To this day, no one has been able to fully explain their function in a scientific way. It means there's still room for some wild theories about the sphere's origins and true purpose. The most popular theory in the scientific community is that the stone spheres served as decorations and status symbols, as many of them were found near the houses of chieftains. Local tribal leaders were also laid to rest with some of the smaller balls, so these stone formations were definitely associated with power in some way. Chiseling a boulder to perfection involved a lot of labor and planning, and only powerful individuals could afford it at the time. The other popular theory is that the boulders were used for astronomical observations. Individual spheres represented stars or planets, like a primitive map of the night sky. Since they were perfectly round, it was easy to roll them around. Before the jungle engulfed them, The area where they were found was a flat alluvial plain, ideal for rolling large boulders around. Another version of this theory suggests that the stones were used as boundary markers, much like modern border stones, which are also mostly made from stone. Finally, legends from other tribes that lived in the area tell of how the spheres were cannonballs that the deity of thunder used to drive away the deity of winds and hurricanes. We still don't know the original purpose of the Costa Rican spheres, but they remain an important part of the country's national identity. The National Museum in the Costa Rican capital, San Jose, has 6 of them in its courtyard. Many other spheres have become prized garden decorations for wealthy Costa Ricans. There's even one at Harvard University. More than a millennium after they were created, the mysterious stone spheres of Costa Rica are still associated with power and wealth. In terms of numbers, the stone orbs are not perfectly round. They are rated as nearly perfect, at 96% spherical in shape. And while even that is pretty impressive, the spheres of Costa Rica are not the only ones of their kind. Nearly a decade ago, workers came across mysterious giant stone spheres deep underground in a coal mine in northern Asia. The surface of the spheres, which measured a little over the length of a human footstep in diameter, was unusually smooth, and people tried to explain it somehow. Some were certain they were out of this world, and others suggested the spheres were actually petrified dinosaur eggs. Scientists quickly put an end to further discussion, as it turned out that the mysterious spheres were concretions. Those are rock formations that take millions of years to form deep underground. Think of a pebble that picks up snow as it rolls down a hill. That's how concretions are made. Groundwater, rich in sediment and minerals, flows around the sediment, slowly shaping it into a perfect orb. The process is quite common in nature, but most concretions are fairly small. The spheres found in the coal mine grew to their size in the mineral-rich ground, and they were big enough to get the press and the general public interested. Another possible case of concretions is the massive stone spheres found in the Visoko Valley in Bosnia. Samir Osmanagic, better known as the Bosnian Indiana Jones, was the first to explore those objects about as wide as the length of a London bus. He believes the stone spheres were carved by a lost civilization that lived in the area 1,000 years ago. The reddish color of the orbs, though, is proof to geologists that they are indeed concretions, rich in iron content. The Moki marbles, found in rural Utah, are similar in color to the Bosnian spheres. These tiny concretions are the size of toy marbles and consist of a sandstone core and a shell made out of hematite, an iron ore. In South Africa, miners have come across Klerksdorp spheres, which are similar in shape and size to Moki marbles. The only difference is that these ones formed inside volcanic sediments and ash. The most intriguing among human-made tiny spheres are probably the orbs found on several Greek islands. Scientists discovered 700 stones smaller than golf balls near the Bronze Age site of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. They believe that the finds were between 3,600 and 4,500 years old. When they compared all the stones' variations in size and color, the archaeologists concluded that these enigmatic stones could have easily been the oldest board game ever made. With the help of artificial intelligence, scientists are now trying to work out the rules of this game.
Before we get into the reason why and how there are pyramids all around the world, let's talk about some of the examples. I'll start with the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. These folks really knew how to build a city. Their well-planned urban center spanned over 7 square miles and boasted several pyramids. But the Pyramid of the Sun is the most impressive. This giant pyramid was built way back in 100 CE and is one of the biggest structures of its kind in the whole Western Hemisphere.
It's so big that it's 216 feet high above the ground. If you ever find yourself in this ancient city, you won't be able to miss the Pyramid of the Sun. It's right there on the east side of the Avenue of the Dead, the city's main north-south street. To build this incredible pyramid, around 1 million cubic yards of material were used, including a special kind of red volcanic rock called hued tizontal. Impressive, huh? We don't know too much about the people who built the Pyramid of the Sun or its purpose. But archaeologists believe there was once a temple on top of it. When explorers went below the pyramid in the 1970s, they found a bunch of cool tunnels and chambers. In 2011, they even found a secret stash of clay pots, obsidian pieces, animal bones, human figurines, and a mask. Who knows what other secrets the pyramid is hiding? If you decide to see this one, you must climb the pyramid using the 248 uneven steps on the west side. Watch your step. Sudan got some pyramids too. Nubian pyramids aren't as big as the ones in Egypt, but they still got around 200 of them. These ancient pyramids have been home to the tombs of the pharaohs of the Meroitic Kingdom for almost 1,000 years, who ruled Egypt from Nubia to the Mediterranean Sea. The pyramids at Meroe were constructed using granite and reddish sandstone. Oh, and did you know that Sudan has more ancient pyramids than Egypt? The Kushite pyramids depict the indigenous architecture and burial traditions of Nubia's Napata and Meroe kingdoms, which ancient Egypt influenced. Meroe, the burial site of over 40 queens and kings, is the most extensive Nubian pyramid site. The tomb walls depict mummified royals bedecked in jewelry, their wooden caskets containing bows, quivers of arrows, and other artifacts pointing to the Meroitic relationship and trade with Egyptian and Greek civilizations. So if you're looking for some ancient tombs to explore, you may consider skipping the crowds in Egypt and heading on down to Sudan. Let's fly to Iraq to see some more pyramids. Ziggurats have fancy receding layers and tiered temples. Instead of a smooth exterior, it has tiers like a cake. Perfect for all the important work and rituals that went on inside. You can find these towering structures scattered throughout Iraq and Iran, and they're a real testament to the power and skills of the people who built them. One of the biggest and most impressive ziggurats is the ziggurat at Ur. It's basically a giant rectangular pyramid that stands a whopping 70 to 100 feet tall, with 3 levels of terraces and a temple on top. Can you imagine how many baked bricks it took to build that thing? Try 720,000 for just the lower portion. This particular ziggurat was built for Sumerian king Ur-Nammu. Similar to other ones, this pyramid has been around for thousands of years, so it got a little rough around the edges. Thankfully, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II and some archaeologists came to the rescue in the 6th and 20th centuries respectively, and now you can find this near Talil Air Base. The ziggurat at Ur was built in 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu for the moon deity Nana. It was the tallest building in the city, and you could see it from miles around. It was like the medieval cathedral spire of its day. People would come here to bring their agricultural surplus and get their food allotments and seek spiritual nourishment. Sadly, the Nana temple at the top of the ziggurat didn't survive, but we do have some blue glazed bricks that may have been part of its decoration. The lower parts of the ziggurat are pretty amazing though. The architects even included holes in the temple's baked exterior to let the water evaporate from its core. Since we explored some of the pyramids on our planet, let's take a broader perspective. They can be found in many parts of the world. Egypt has over 100 pyramids, double that number in Sudan, and dozens of others are scattered in the Middle East and China.
The Americas have the most pyramids in total, with more pyramids than the rest of the world combined. These pyramids are located in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Time to know more about the evolution of pyramids through history. The oldest pyramid is in Egypt. This pyramid was a step pyramid, which was created by placing one layer of stone on top of another. The pharaoh Sneferu is credited with creating the pyramid shape we recognize today. During his 45-year reign, he built 3 pyramids. His first 2 attempts failed, but he finally got it right with the Red Pyramid, which is considered the first true pyramid. It was Sneferu's son, Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. Latin American pyramids are similar to early Egyptian step pyramids, but they were built independently, with no knowledge of each other. The pyramids in Sudan were built around 700 BCE and are tall but much narrower than those in Egypt. How in the world did all these civilizations build these things without even texting each other? After all, the Aztecs, Mayans, and ancient Egyptians were about as different as possible. But despite their cultural differences, they all seem to agree on one thing: pyramids were pretty cool. Step pyramids are all around the world because they were the most feasible and stable way to build large and tall structures without access to lighter building materials like wood and metal. The triangular form with a square base is the best way to build a sturdy structure, and having a cube structure would require more material for less height. Now, when it comes to pyramid design, the Egyptian pyramids were like giant triangles with a square base, smooth sides, and a pointy top. On the other hand, the Aztecs and Mayans went for a tiered cake look, with steps leading up to a flat platform on top. So, while all these pyramids share the same basic shape, they have their own unique flair. Each group built its pyramids using different materials, techniques, and slope angles. So while they may have been inspired by each other's work occasionally, they were just doing their own thing. Egyptian pyramids had smooth, angled sides that were designed to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to heaven. The Pyramid of the Sun was built over a series of caves that served as a passageway for the deities. The Maya built the temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza to honor the deity Kukulkan, usually represented by a serpent. Nicknamed El Castillo, it has 91 steps on each side, plus a platform. That's 365 steps, one for each day of the Mayan calendar. Tell me, Brightsiders, how were pyramids built? To begin with, humans made them, not a foreign race from space that landed on Earth. You see, one thing that all pyramids have in common is that they were built without advanced tools or even the wheel. It took a lot of people to build them, including skilled laborers and architects. For example, it's estimated that 20,000 people built the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's believed that most of them were skilled laborers. Building pyramids was a massive undertaking that required years of planning and effort. The Great Pyramid at Cholula, Mexico, took 600 years to complete.
Hey, if you think Stonehenge is one of the oldest stone monuments ever, well, let me introduce you to Göbekli Tepe. Buckle up, we gotta travel to Turkey to meet this really old guy. Yeah, he's too old to travel. Jokes aside, Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site located in southeastern Turkey that dates back to the Neolithic period, around 10,000 BCE. It's considered to be one of the oldest and most significant archaeological discoveries in recent times. The site consists of a series of circular and rectangular structures made of stone pillars. Yeah, it does look like its younger brother Stonehenge. Some of those pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals and other symbols. Now, you maybe wonder, hey, why on earth did they make such a fascinating building? What was its purpose? Sorry, I got no answer for that. The purpose of the site is still unknown, but it is believed to have been a ceremonial center for the ancient people who lived in the area. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe has challenged long-held beliefs about the development of human civilization, as it suggests that complex societies may have emerged much earlier than previously thought. Okay, pack your stuff, our travel's just started. Next destination, Masada. It's an ancient fortress located in Israel on a plateau overlooking the Dead Sea. Hey, look at that view, spectacular, huh? It was built by King Herod the Great in the 1st century BCE, and it was very smartly built. Within the fortress, there were various facilities such as storehouses, barracks, a palace, and a set of cisterns capable of holding approximately 40,000 cubic meters of rainwater. People living there believed that the collected runoff from a single day's rainfall could provide sustenance for over 1,000 individuals for a period of 2 to 3 years. Access to the fortress was limited to 3 steep and winding paths leading up to fortified gates. Still, at one point, the fortress was occupied by people who had fled Jerusalem after the city was captured by the Romans. They held out against the invaders for several months, but eventually they were defeated. But these guys didn't surrender. The story of Masada has become a symbol of resistance and bravery. Today, Masada is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The next flight is going to be short. We're popping over to Egypt to see the Karnak Temple Complex. It's a vast ancient Egyptian temple complex located in the city of Luxor, Egypt. It was built over a period of 2,000 years and covers an area of more than 200 acres. The complex is dedicated to the worship of the deity Amun-Ra. Wait a minute, that should be Amun-Ra, and it was one of the most important religious centers in ancient Egypt. The Karnak Temple consists of several temples, chapels, and other buildings, including the Great Temple of Amun, the Temple of Khonsu, and the Temple of Ptah. Ptah! The Great Temple of Amun is the largest and most impressive temple in the complex, with massive columns, statues, and other decorations. One of the most famous features of the Karnak Temple complex is the Avenue of Sphinxes, which is a long avenue lined with Sphinx statues that leads from the entrance of the complex to the Great Temple of Amun. Another notable feature is the Hypostyle Hall, which is a massive hall with 134 columns that are over 70 feet high. The Karnak Temple complex is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's considered one of the most important archaeological sites in Egypt and provides a fascinating glimpse into the religion and culture of ancient Egypt. Hey, we can't hop on the next flight and leave Egypt until we see the Pyramid of Djoser. It has another name, by the way. It's also known as the Step Pyramid. This ancient Egyptian site is located in Saqqara. It was built during the 27th century BCE for the pharaoh Djoser by his architect Imhotep, who is considered one of the most important figures in Egyptian history. People believe this pyramid is the first monumental structure built entirely of stone and is an important example of early Egyptian architecture. The pyramid originally stood at 203 feet tall and was surrounded by a complex of buildings and courtyards. It was constructed in 6 layers, each smaller than the one below it, giving it the distinctive step-like appearance. The pyramid was used as a burial place for Pharaoh Djoser and was surrounded by a vast necropolis that contained the tombs of many other important officials. The Grateful Dead? The Pyramid of Djoser has several renovations and additions over the centuries, including the addition of a limestone casing that covered the original step structure. However, much of the pyramid was destroyed over time, and today only the central core remains. Despite this, it remains an important archaeological site and a popular tourist attraction in Egypt. Alrighty, we're ready to move on. There's one more pretty recent discovery we gotta see today. The Tower of Jericho was only discovered during excavations in the 1950s and 60s. It's an ancient stone tower located in the city of Jericho in the West Bank. Just like Göbekli Tepe, This one is believed to be one of the oldest stone structures in the world, dating back to approximately 8000 BCE. The tower stands at over 28 feet tall. It's made up of two main sections, an inner tower and an outer tower, which are connected by a series of stairs. The purpose of the Tower of Jericho is not entirely clear, but it is believed to have served as a defensive structure or a watchtower. It may have also had religious significance, as it was located near a sacred spring. The Tower of Jericho is a significant archaeological site and has provided valuable insights into the early history of human civilization. It's open to visitors and is a popular destination for tourists interested in ancient history. Now, this ancient site even got attention from Netflix, and they made a movie where the action takes place in Mohenjo-Daro. This site was a major center of the Indus Valley civilization in present-day Pakistan. Mohenjo-Daro was one of the largest cities of the ancient world, with a population estimated to have been around 40,000 in its peak. Trust me, that must have been a crazy megalopolis back then. The city was notable for its advanced urban planning, with sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems, and its impressive architecture, including the Great Bath and the Granary. Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned around 1900 BCE, and its ruins were only rediscovered in the 1920s. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and an important archaeological site for the study of ancient South Asian civilization. We're heading to a teeny-tiny country that has quite an impressive history. Welcome to Malta. The Xigantia Temples are a Neolithic site located on the Mediterranean island of Gozo. They're probably one of the oldest freestanding structures in the world, dating back to around 3600 to 3200 BCE. The temples consist of two megalithic structures, each with multiple rooms and altars. The name Xigantia means giant tower in Maltese, as people believe that only giants could have built such massive structures. The temples are believed to have been used for religious purposes and are considered to be an important example of prehistoric architecture. They were added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1980. Well, you must be pretty tired, but there's one more place we gotta visit today. Our plane is already landing in Armenia, and we're here to see the Temple of Garni. Look, this one is well preserved. This temple dates back to the 1st century CE. It was built by King Tiridates I as a dedication to the sun deity Mir. Sadly, the temple was destroyed in the 17th century during an earthquake, which is quite a common thing for this area, but it was later reconstructed in the 20th century. Today, it's a popular tourist attraction and is also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Hey, future explorers. Let me tell you, some stuff might still be hanging around even 2,000 years later. Finland has an underground nuclear storage facility designed to last 100,000 years. Picture a massive underground tunnel system carved right out of solid rock. They wanted a solution that wouldn't burden future generations with constant babysitting in the area. This impressive place sits about 185 miles northwest of Helsinki. The engineers started planning it way back in the 1970s. They wanted to close up shop and decommission it in the 2000s. The heart of the crib is a spiraling track that's going to stretch 3 miles, diving down. To ensure maximum safety, they've got a bunch of multiple barriers in place. Steel and concrete structures are supposed to do the job. The waste fuel rods will be snuggled inside copper canisters with thick walls. These canisters will sit on a cozy bed of bentonite clay, which swells up when it gets wet. This way, it acts as a buffer against any geological shenanigans and prevents any pooling of liquid, which could corrode the copper. It's an incredible feat of engineering, and it's almost like creating a time capsule that will withstand the test of time. Kudos to the folks working on this, even though they won't be around to celebrate when it's done. Maybe in the future, they will find a way to make it last for hundreds of years more. I mean, they started planning it in the 1970s, but in the future, it would be a totally different game. Let's move on to Italy. When you stroll into the Pantheon in Rome, it puts on a show just like it did almost 2,000 years ago. Now, let's rewind a bit. This structure went through some tough times. The first Pantheon caught fire and burned down not once, but twice. Some fellas even said it was cursed. The completed Pantheon was a grand masterpiece with Greek-inspired touches, like those fancy columns. But the real jaw-dropper was its gigantic dome, the largest unsupported concrete dome on the planet. Now, the Pantheon's original purpose remains a mystery. Some say it was a Roman worshipping spot, while others think it was where the emperor got his hotline to the deities. The massive eye on top, known as the oculus, lets in sunbeams and rain. Marble from all over the Mediterranean made it look snazzy, but the Roman concrete made the magic happen. Then we've got the impressive Hoover Dam in the USA, an architectural masterpiece. Experts designed it to harness hydroelectricity and prevent water from going where it shouldn't. This dam is built like a fortress. Steel, concrete, and a lot of TLC keep it strong. Let's jet off to New Delhi and check out the Akshardham Temple, even though it's very young compared to the other structures I've mentioned. It was completed in 2005. It already has the characteristics of a building that can stand for a long time. During the construction, numerous ancient and modern innovations were used to ensure its endurability. Next on our list of the world's most future-proof buildings is the St. Louis Arch, which rises high over Missouri. Also known as the Gateway Arch, it is the tallest human-made monument in the USA. The Great Wall of China. While it's not a single building, the Great Wall of China is an ancient marvel that has survived for centuries. Some sections of the wall were reconstructed in modern times, but they still carry historical and cultural significance. Those bricks might look a little crumbly, but hey, they're still standing strong. Then we have the former Byzantine church, now known as Hagia Sophia from Istanbul. It still looks glorious, and it's 1,500 years old. It's been through many things, like earthquakes. Architects designed Hagia Sophia in an impressively short period. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II converted it into a mosque. He added some new stuff, like a minaret and a chandelier. Hagia Sophia is a unique architectural marvel. Its main dome is 105 feet tall and flanked by two semi-domes on both sides. In terms of its floor plan, the building is nearly square, but from the interior perspective, it appears rectangular because of the extension of the roof by large semi-domes. The interior has 3 aisles separated by columns, with galleries above and substantial marble piers rising at both ends to support the dome. These columns are constructed of the finest marble, carefully chosen for their color and variety, while the lower walls are adorned with marble slabs. On the outside, there are windows above the galleries and around the base of the dome. When the sun's shining, it kinda tricks your eyes into thinking the dome is floating, because these windows hide the support structures. We couldn't have put together a list of the world's sturdiest buildings without mentioning perhaps the most famously enduring of them all, the Pyramids of Giza. They were completed around 2540 BCE. They've got the whole package: superior materials, genius engineering, and a design that puts all other structures to shame. The ancient Egyptians were all about building for eternity. They believed that the afterlife would last forever, so they made sure their tombs would too. The Egyptians threw in extra walls and other stuff just to be safe, even if they didn't fully understand the laws of physics. Now, let's shift our gaze to our time. Can today's skyscrapers beat the pyramids in the longevity game? The Burj Khalifa in Dubai is the world's tallest building. It boasts impressive engineering and architecture. Its reinforced concrete and steel structure, along with its iconic design, might help it withstand the test of time. Sure, skyscrapers are super tall and fancy, but they're not as sturdy as the pyramids. Modern skyscrapers need to deal with crazy winds, lightning strikes, and earthquakes too. Experts haven't agreed on this yet. Some say that if we take good care of them, they can last. But others think they'll eventually be torn down or abandoned. The verdict? Only time will tell. Alexander Rose and his team are up to something jaw-dropping. They're creating a 10,000-year clock in the Texan desert. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's take a trip to Japan. There, they have this fantastic tradition of rebuilding the Jingu Shrine with wood and thatch every 20 years for more than 13 centuries. It's to preserve the structures and pass on the craftsmanship to the next generation. But let's not stop there. Ancient artifacts and buildings from various cultures have survived the test of time, and each one has something to teach us. The clock project takes inspiration from these long-lasting wonders and aims to encourage us to think about our long-term future. Building a clock to last 10,000 years is no easy feat. The team must consider materials, location, and past examples of long-lasting structures. For instance, some of history's unique treasures survived simply because they were lost and found later. Going underground is another way to protect artifacts. Subterranean environments shield items from the elements and keep temperatures stable. But there's one pesky problem: water. It's always trying to sneak its way in. Materials matter big time when it comes to longevity. You see, everything ages because of oxidation, which means rusting. So, finding materials that can withstand thousands of years is vital. How long buildings can really last depends on the building's personality and purpose. Take those fancy office buildings, for instance. They're all about short-term commitment, designed to last only 30 to 50 years. Just like with any relationship, it takes effort to make something last longer. Regular checkups, maintenance, and repairs are the key to keeping the spark alive.
So look at this narrow passage between the north of Morocco and the southern part of the Spanish region. It's called the Strait of Gibraltar. There are only 8 miles between the two continents, but for some reason, there's no bridge, despite people having been dreaming for centuries about connecting these two regions. There are places in the world where a bridge over water stretches for a much greater distance. For example, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway near New Orleans, Louisiana, goes for 24 miles, which is 3 times the length of the hypothetical bridge between Africa and Europe. That's listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest continuous bridge passing over water. It consists of 2 parallel bridges and connects the urban area of New Orleans with small settlements in the north of Lake Pontchartrain. 9,000 concrete piles hold more than 1,000 decks above the water. This large-scale structure was built in the middle of the 20th century. It only took 14 months from the start of construction to its completion. American engineers created a unique technology for attaching concrete piles to the base of the bridge, and this bridge is still functioning. So, what's the problem with building a shorter bridge to connect Africa and Europe? Let's first find out the value of the 8-mile bridge that could connect 2 continents and the reason why everyone is talking about it. In fact, the value of such a bridge would be enormous. Diamonds, oil, minerals. Africa is full of valuable materials, and Europe is happy to buy these things. This theoretical bridge could allow people to transport things for trade quickly and comfortably. But now, the exchange of goods between Africa and Europe is only possible thanks to airplanes and cargo ships, and airplanes are extremely expensive because of hefty fuel price tags. In addition, air travel is often delayed because of bad weather. There are long customs procedures and transportation from the airport to the destination. Ships can also be a problem. The narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea, where the two continents are closest to each other, is a dangerous place because of storms and strong currents. The transportation of your diamonds is highly dependent on weather conditions. The second advantage of such a bridge would be the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. People from Europe and Africa would build hotels, ports, parks, and even small towns for each other. The coastal parts of both continents would become a new economic center. And just imagine how much investment those places would attract. Europe and Africa would be much closer than ever before. You could drive from a small Spanish town to a safari park in northern Morocco, buy Moroccan tea, get some argan oil, and go home for the evening. Or you could take a high-speed train across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. People would open hundreds of restaurants, amusement parks, shopping malls, and a museum next to this bridge. But, unfortunately, it's impossible to build such a bridge, at least at the moment. And here's why. The main problem is the Strait of Gibraltar itself, because of its strong currents and seismic activity. How can you start large-scale construction if, in a couple of days, an underwater earthquake can trigger giant waves and take all the ships underwater? Even if you build a bridge, rapid streams of water that constantly change direction can shake the entire structure and tear the connecting parts of the construction. The bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar must have a strong, sturdy system that will withstand seismic activity. Huge resources are required to create such a complex structure. Despite the dangerous passage between the two continents, it remains one of the busiest points in the world. It's the only place on the planet connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. About 300 ships pass through this area every day. Not only merchant ships, but also fishing vessels and tourist boats. There are not so many places in the world where you can watch whales coming out of the water. Not only people, but also marine creatures often visit this passage because of the peculiarities of the sea currents. But we'll talk about that later. Another problem is the depth of the strait. In simple words, any bridge over the water is built on long metal piles. Builders and engineers stick piles into the seabed and use them as a holding base for the whole construction. But installing such piles firmly enough is a difficult task because of the uneven seabed. The seabed has a unique geological landscape, irregularities, and different densities of the Earth's rock. There are also reefs, rocks, and pits. Any seabed requires extensive geological studies before piles are installed. However, the bottom of the Strait of Gibraltar is especially difficult because of its depth, almost 3,000 feet. It's one of the deepest straits in the whole world. Just imagine, you'll need the height of 10 Statues of Liberty to reach the surface of the water from the bottom of the strait. What kind of pile should be used there to hold the entire bridge? Most likely, one pile will have to consist of several parts connected into one large metal rod. And don't forget about seismic activity. Let's say you've installed perfectly strong piles, but the next day an earthquake occurs and destroys the entire structure. And a strong current is carrying fortifications all over the Mediterranean Sea. The next problem is probably the most important one, because it concerns marine life. The Strait of Gibraltar has a high salt content. This natural element makes water heavier and makes it descend to the bottom of the deep Mediterranean basin. Then, this salt water pushes up cold water from the seabed into the Atlantic Ocean. These changes in water density, as well as fast currents, create sea vortices and turbulence. It's like a raging cauldron of cold water that raises a lot of nutrients to the surface. The hollows and hills of the Strait of Gibraltar are filled with different substances and sunlight, and this creates ideal conditions for the formation of phytoplankton. Whales, dolphins, and other marine creatures adore this delicacy. That's why you can see about 7 species of whales and dolphins in this place. What might happen to phytoplankton after the start of global construction? Carbon dioxide, crushed rock, tons of dust and ashes, falling building materials – all of this could significantly pollute the environment. Without phytoplankton, many fish would go extinct. Without fish, thousands of fishers wouldn't be able to get food and earn money. But even if the bridge was built, cars and trains would continue to pollute the air and water. This disruption of the delicate balance in this narrow strait can lead to larger-scale environmental disasters. Dolphins and whales may leave to look for food elsewhere, and thus take resources from other marine inhabitants. Like falling dominoes, one problem can follow another. And all this because of one bridge. In 2007, the Spanish Ministry of Environmental Protection introduced speed limits for all ships sailing through the strait in order to not disrupt the delicate balance of nature. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French engineer proposed a project of a bridge, but it was rejected because it was too complicated and costly. People also tried to develop a 23-mile-long tunnel, but this project also faced financial and technical difficulties. People are still dreaming of a bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar. Perhaps, in the future, when we develop cooler technologies, we'll be able to build this thing. Oh, by the way, there hasn't always been water between these two regions. In the distant past, the two continents were connected. The entire Mediterranean Sea is the remains of the Diquis Sea that existed before the era of dinosaurs. Then the African and Indian plates collided with the Eurasian one, and the Diquis Sea completely disappeared. In its place, a land bridge was formed that separated the Mediterranean Sea from the ocean. Without access to water, the sea dried up about 6 million years ago. But then, when the bridge came down, the water began to fill the dried-up pool. For tens of thousands of years, the narrow plate sank lower and lower, and the Mediterranean Sea eventually got its current water levels. So, you're walking along a wide street of a huge megacity and feel as if you've suddenly been transported into a post-apocalyptic movie. Everything around is eerily quiet. The high-rise buildings surrounding you look new but deserted. There are no cars and no people. Has doomsday taken them all? Those might be your thoughts if you visited Ordos Cambashi, a new city in China's Inner Mongolia a few years ago. The place rose in a desert rapidly in less than a decade. It has wonderful architecture, lots of public spaces, and rows upon rows of fresh new houses. But the place didn't get famous because of it all. Instead, the city became known for something it didn't have – people. The media started calling it a ghost town. They claimed it was empty, with no businesses or life. Well, I've got so many questions here, and the main one is, why didn't people want to live there? Now there's a curious twist to this story. The thing is, news stories, which describe Ordos Cambashi as a ghost town and generally a failure, began in 2009. Some reporters visited the place and figured out that not so many people lived there. At that time, the city indeed looked like a megalopolis after a terrible disaster. But the problem was, the reporters didn't ask local officials why the city was so empty, and they missed a key point. By that time, the city had only been under construction for 6 years. It hadn't even been finished yet. True, there weren't many people living there when they called the place a ghost city, but the reporters didn't know the full story and exaggerated the facts to impress readers. You want to know the real story? Ordos wasn't a ghost town built for nobody. It was just a city still in the making. The city's original plan was to build a comfortable place for 1 million people by 2023. But some unpleasant changes in the coal market occurred. Sadly, it was Ordos's main source of income, so the plan was scaled down to about 300,000 people. In its first 5 years, Ordos Cambashi got a whole downtown with offices, a world-class museum, and an opera house. It even had a cool library. It was shaped like books standing on a shelf. But even though the place already looked like a city, in reality, it was still under construction. It wasn't a ghost town. It was more like a construction site. Early on, nobody lived in Ordos Kembashi full-time since there weren't enough schools, hospitals, and shops. People went there to work and then returned to their hometowns at the end of the day. It took a few more years to build these facilities, so no wonder that, at first, the population of the city was small. Ordos isn't a true ghost town these days, just as our next destination. We're traveling all the way to Africa to a massive new residential area, Nova Cidade de Colomba. You can find it 18 miles away from Angola's capital, Luanda. The city has 750 apartment buildings, more than a dozen schools, and over 100 retail spaces. The project cost $3.5 billion, more than I make in a year, and was supposed to house up to 500,000 people. They used to show Colomba in glossy promotional videos. In those mini-movies, happy families lived far from the crowded, chaotic districts of Luanda. But there was a catch. The people in the videos were not real residents, they were actors. Because nearly a year after the first 2,800 apartments had gone on sale, only 220 were sold. If you had come to visit Colomba in the first years of its existence, it would have been eerily quiet. You would have seen the rows of colorful apartment buildings standing empty, closed shutters, deserted balconies. There would have been barely any cars and hardly anyone around. Most of the shops would have been vacant, except for the hypermarket at the entrance. Even if people had lived there would have been nowhere to buy basic things like food. There's no mystery here. Apartments in Colombo were priced between $120,000 and $200,000, and that was way far beyond the reach of most Angolans. Two-thirds of them live on less than $2 a day. It was also incredibly difficult to get a bank loan. Even with new laws designed to help people get mortgages, many Angolans couldn't afford the down payments, even those with decent-paying jobs. Luckily, sometime later, prices of the smallest units were reduced from $125,000 to $70,000. As a result, the population increased to 80,000 residents by July 2015. In 2019, the population was already 129,000. As for 2024, Colomba has become a desired destination for middle-class Angolans. Meanwhile, it's time to visit the next place on our list of post-apocalyptic megacities. Imagine walking down cobblestone streets with lines of charming old-style homes on each side. You pass Edwardian houses and Victorian terraces. Oh look, a fish and chip shop over there, and iconic red phone boxes. It looks like a scene straight out of England. But here's the twist. You're only 40 minutes away from downtown Shanghai. Huh? The thing is, Shanghai tried to give its residents a taste of the world. And back in 2001, they started an ambitious project called One City, 9 Towns. The idea was to relieve terrible overcrowding in the city by building 9 suburban communities. Each of them was designed to look like a different Western country. One of those is Thames Town, a little slice of England. Over $330 million was spent creating this mini England from scratch. They even imported actual lampposts from the UK and built a replica of a famous Gothic church from Bristol. But it wasn't just about England. Other towns were inspired by Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, and even Canada. So, what happened? Well, the houses in Thames Town sold fast, but most of the middle-class people they were meant for couldn't afford them. Instead, wealthy buyers swooped in, getting them as investments or second homes. And now Thames Town and most of the other 9 towns remain empty. The area has turned into a ghost town, with beautiful houses and shops, but no one to live there. Our next destination isn't too far away. Welcome to one of the strangest capital cities in the world, Naypyidaw. Now, imagine a city built from scratch right in the middle of rice paddies and sugarcane fields. In 2005, Myanmar showed the world its brand new capital, named Naypyidaw, which means the seat of the king. The rumor has it, the city cost up to $4 billion to build. This surreal city is 6 times the size of New York City. Everything there is supersized. Roads have up to 20 lanes and stretch as far as the eye can see. There's a safari park and at least 2 golf courses. Unlike in the rest of the country, there's reliable electricity there, and many restaurants have free fast Wi-Fi. But there's one big issue: the place is weirdly empty. It even got international attention because of its odd layout and ghost town vibe. If you look closer, though, you might spot pairs of street cleaners in neon green vests. They're walking up and down those roads, sweeping streets that are already spotless. But what's the point if no one wants to live there? People say it's boring, expensive, and has no infrastructure for life. The whole place feels like an extreme test of if you build it, they will come. The test the city seems to have failed. Let's fly back to the USA now. There, in Pennsylvania, you'll see a town on fire. It's Centralia, a near ghost town. Since 1962, a coal fire has been burning underneath this small town and is likely to keep burning for the next 250 years. It all started with an attempt to clean up the local landfill. It accidentally ignited the coal seams underground. Over the years, people abandoned their homes as the fire created dangerous sinkholes and filled the air with poisonous gas, such as carbon monoxide. In 1992, the state had taken over most of the land, leaving just a handful of residents. They agreed to give up their property when they passed away. Centralia was doomed, and the fire is still burning beneath its empty streets. So, tell me, which of the ghost cities would you like to visit? Tell us in the comments.